Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Infowars Nightly News with me, your host, Paul Joseph Watson. Coming up, news on election fraud, Obama's new dictator status, and more. We're also going to have interviews conducted by Alex Jones with Lionel from Lionel Media, and Alex will also talk to Antonio Bieler about an incident on New Year's Eve where Bieler was arrested for trying to defend a woman from police brutality. But first, our top story tonight. Americans cheer Obama as dictator. Earlier this week, President Barack Obama announced the unprecedented step to make numerous appointments to high office without the approval of the Senate. In particular, Obama's appointment of Richard Cordray to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was a direct violation of Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which states that such appointments cannot be made without Senate confirmation unless the Senate is in recess, which, of course, it isn't at the moment. Now, voices from across the political spectrum have denounced this unconstitutional move with vitriol. Ron Paul likened Obama to a dictator. Senator John McCain labeled it, quote, an absolute abuse of power. Congressman Dan Burton accused Obama of acting, quote, in direct dereliction of his oath to the American people to protect and defend the Constitution. But perhaps the most shocking aspect to this story is that when Obama told a crowd on Wednesday, quote, I refuse to take no for an answer, in acknowledging that he resorted to dictatorial actions to prevent the Senate from blocking the appointment, the audience responded by clapping and cheering. That's right, Americans clapping and cheering for the destruction of their own constitutional system. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Check out this compilation of clips where the audience also whoops, hollers and applauds Obama for suggesting that he take on the role of dictator and bypass Congress altogether.
That would have created this commission. So I'll issue an executive order that will allow us to go forward because I refuse to pass this problem on to another generation of Americans. I know some here wish that I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. I know there's some folks who wish I could just bypass Congress. I can. Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own. Believe me. And believe me, right now dealing with Congress, the idea But believe me, the idea of doing things on my own is very tempting.
So there you have it. Not only is the Obama administration flagrantly violating the Constitution and announcing it publicly, and of course Nancy Pelosi says she's, quote, proud and very glad about what Obama is doing with these appointments, but these Obamanoid cult followers are openly urging the president to assume dictator status. That's what the most frightening aspect about this whole controversy is. Now, moving on to our next story, Iran war games set to coincide with US-Israeli drill. Just days after the end of the previous round of war games, Iran has announced that it intends to launch a massive new naval exercise in the Strait of Hormuz, a key oil choke point, in a few weeks' time. Quote, the newly announced Iranian drills, codenamed the Great Prophet, may coincide with major naval exercises that Israel and the United States are planning to hold in the Persian Gulf in the near future, reports RIA Novosti, the Russian news outlet. So we're going to have three countries all engaged in war games within this congested geographical area. And this, of course, arrives after the US provocatively sailed the John C. Stennis warship through the Strait of Hormuz at the height of Iran's previous round of war games just about around a week ago. An incident that prompted Iran to fire off test missiles and warn the US ship not to re-enter the Persian Gulf. And of course, this is all ongoing amidst the EU's oil embargo threat and the financial attack on Iran's economy, which has already devalued their currency by 10%. Now, on the face of it, the threat of something going awry amidst two major overlapping war games is, of course, a distinct possibility. But let's not forget the aftermath of the last major naval confrontation between the United States and Iran in that very region. Of course, it occurred 4 years ago in January 2008 when the US announced it had been, quote, moments away from firing on an Iranian patrol boat that had allegedly threatened to attack a US warship in the Strait of Hormuz. And the tape of the threat, of course, later turned out to be dubious. The New York Times reported that the broadcast did not come from the Iranian ship. But what's interesting is that, according to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh, the incident led to a discussion in Vice President Dick Cheney's office about how to start a war with Iran by launching a false flag attack at sea. The January Strait of Hormuz incident taught Cheney and other administration officials, quote, if you get the right incident, the American public will support it, Hersh said. Quote, there are a dozen ideas proffered about how to trigger a war. The one that interested me most was why don't we build, in our own shipyard, build 4 or 5 boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them with a lot of arms, and next time one of our boats goes to the Strait of Hormuz, start a shoot-up. Might cost some lives. Now, the plan was ultimately rejected because it would have cost American lives, but the potential for a similar scenario to arise in the Strait of Hormuz amidst all these war games, whether real or manufactured, remains a very real threat, especially given the amount of warships, US warships, that are either already in the Fifth Fleet region or are on their way there at the moment. So given the fact that the Obama administration's foreign policy of preemptive warfare has mirrored that pursued by the Bush administration, the potential for a stage-managed provocation to create a pretext for an attack on Iran during this next round of naval war games is clear. Moving on to economic news now. Media celebrates bogus job numbers. Now, we've had new jobs figures out today that were celebrated by the mainstream media as a sign of the recovering US economy. 200,000 new workers were added to the payroll in December, reports Bloomberg, a figure that beat expectations of 150,000. And the corporate press instantly fell about themselves with glee about how this contradicted the doommongers for daring to suggest that the recovery is in fact non-existent, as many of the guests on this show have done. However, as Zero Hedge reports, the 200,000 figure is completely phony. Quote, enamored with the 200,000 number? Don't be. The reason why the market was basically yawned at the BLS data is the fact that Morgan Stanley's David Greenlaw reports 42,000 of the 200,000 figure is basically a seasonal quirk, which will be given back next month, meaning that the true adjusted number is 158,000, essentially right on top of the expectation. From David Greenlaw, quote, some of the strength in this report should be discounted because of a seasonal quirk in the courier category of payrolls, e.g. FedEx, UPS. Jobs in this sector jumped 42,000 in December, repeating a pattern seen in 2009 and 2010. We should see a payback in the next month's report. So basically, they've had a seasonal uptick of 42,000 members in these delivery industries. That's going to be given back next month. It's going to be taken away from the figure. But the corporate media has dishonestly included it in the final total to make it look as if everything's hunky-dory. And of course, we know that any jobs figure is fundamentally flawed because it fails to take into account the thousands of Americans each month who give up looking for work altogether. They're not included at any point in the final number given in these jobs figures. Moving on. Steve Watson reports on Infowars.com, Iowa officials deny vote count error, reports as rumor, innuendo, allegation. GOP officials in Iowa have dismissed reports circulating online that there was a significant flaw in vote counting during Tuesday's caucuses and have ruled out the possibility of overturning the results. Quote, Iowa GOP officials have been in contact with Appanoose County Republican officials tonight and do not have any reason to believe the final certified results of Appanoose County will change the outcome of Tuesday's vote, wrote Iowa Republican Party Chairman Matt Straw in a statement Thursday night. Out of respect to the candidates involved, party officials will not respond to every rumour, innuendo or allegation during the two-week process, Straw added. And the statement came in response to claims of discrepancies by a Ron Paul supporter in Appanoose County who told an Iowa TV station that he believes there was a 20-vote discrepancy in the numbers he recorded from his caucus and the numbers that the Iowa Republican Party reported. Quote, when Mitt Romney won Iowa by 8 votes and I've got a 20-vote discrepancy here, that right there says Rick Santorum won Iowa, Edward True told KCCI TV, not Mitt Romney. So let's go to that clip from KCCI TV.
When Mitt Romney won Iowa by 8 votes and I've got a 20-vote discrepancy here, that right there says Rick Santorum won Iowa, not Mitt Romney.
28-year-old Edward True helped count the votes and jotted the results down on this piece of paper to post on his Facebook page later. His notes say Mitt Romney received 2 votes, but according to the Iowa Republican Party's website, True's precinct cast 22 votes for Romney. A spokeswoman for the Iowa Republican Party says True is not a precinct captain and he's not a county chair, so he has no business talking about election results. She also said they wouldn't offer any interviews on possible discrepancies until the vote is certified. True said there was one other mistake. The Iowa GOP reports there are a total of 79 votes cast at his caucus, but only 53 people attended that night, he said.
So we have a situation in Iowa where there's no requirement to show any form of ID before you vote, meaning the candidates backed by the most money can have people voting multiple times over and over again. And this whistleblower, as you heard in the clip, said that there were only 53 in attendance at the caucus, and yet the Republicans are claiming there were 79 votes. Something doesn't add up, quite literally. But Santorum's campaign and the Republican establishment have just shrugged it off and told everybody to move along. Now, in this case, it was Santorum that was cheated, but Ron Paul could have easily had the same thing happen to him. We know that last election in 2008 in New Hampshire, an almost identical situation happened to Ron Paul. So as we move on to New Hampshire, which takes place next week, January 10th, with Ron Paul holding that strong second position, we need to watch this carefully to see if the phenomenon repeats itself, because we've learned from the past that Ron Paul has been cheated out of votes. So to have evidence of that happening and for the Republican establishment to just shrug it off and for Santorum to shrug it off, even though it's directly impacted him, he could have won the overall Iowa caucus. In fact, he lost by 8 votes. If these votes had have been counted properly, Santorum could have outright won. So massive evidence of election fraud, and we'll continue to track it as we move towards New Hampshire next week. Kurt Nimmo reports on Infowars.com. Big Brother in St. Louis. Schools plan to monitor student activity at home. Elementary schools in Missouri plan to use wristwatch-like devices called Polar Active monitors to surveil children not only at school but also at home. Parkway Elementary Schools in St. Louis plan to, quote, collect data about activity levels and even sleep patterns for a week at a time. It will have the students wear the devices around the clock, according to stltoday.com. And so it's not enough that they're turning the schools into prisons where every child is tracked and surveilled, preparing the kids to grow up with Big Brother all around them, the constant pervasive presence. Now a little piece of Big Brother is being asked to take home with them, just like the laptops that were taken home by students in Philadelphia with built-in webcams that allowed school administrators to spy on the kids, which of course prompted a class action lawsuit. And just like the other cases we've covered where social services are kidnapping so-called obese children, it's safe to assume that if these activity levels, if these exercise levels measured by these wristbands are not up to scratch, then harsh questions of the parents will be asked. Yet another reason to join the growing army of parents who have decided to homeschool their children. Moving on, Obama propaganda front Media Matters attacks Alex Jones and Ron Paul. They had